Hello and welcome to PCM's Webinar Thursday. We are thrilled to have you with us today for our Microsoft webinar, Private Cloud versus Public Cloud. Joining us today is Orad. We're going to get right into our main presentation in just a few minutes, but first I have a few housekeeping items. Please enter your questions in the question box on the right-hand side and I'll relay those to our speaker at the end of the presentation. We do send out a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out and let us know how we did as well as topics you'd like to see covered on future webinars. You should see that survey in your inbox later today. Speaking of future webinars, please be sure to check out our weekly webinar schedule on our website at www.pcm.com/webinars/archive. We are recording this webinar. It will be available for playback in a few days. Recordings are posted to our webinars page along with our upcoming webinar schedule. There you can also find previous webinar recordings. And with that, we're going to get started with our main presentation today, and I'm happy to hand it off to Orad.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Let me just make sure you can see my screen. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Waiting for you. There it goes.
All right. All right. Morning, everyone. So we're going to cover a lot of more higher level content in this webinar just to get a better understanding on what the difference is between a private cloud and a public cloud and the solutions that are incorporated in a public cloud environment. So understanding what cloud is, or cloud architecture, it's an ever-changing environment. It's been there since adaptable times. So cloud computing, or data center functionality, has been around since the 1960s. First, we need to get a little understanding on what the history of this data center functionality is. So since data centers been around for many years, the concept of the concept is a fundamental concept of enterprise computing. So data centers, or mainframe functionality, has been there for organizations or enterprise to utilize a central location to store content and data for them to be able to easily access these contents. And so when you're going into a data center or mainframe, it requires traditionally a specialized room that you would have to manage and provide power to, provide cooling for these systems to operate properly, and allowing you to manage these devices at a more controlled record. So understanding where a centralized location of a data center would be. So that's where we get into in a centralized data center model. Centralized data center model allows your organization to have a central, and usually this is what happens when organizations are having office buildings. They'll dedicate a central room for content to be stored on there for their day-to-day work. Now, the organization becomes responsible for providing the power and the cooling, and also providing the activity that it needs to be backed up and served in this regards to the data center. So this is a traditional model than what most organizations are used to. It's been around for years, that allows you to utilize business-grade enterprise services without having to actually cross through the internet pathways. So you're not utilizing internet connectivity for business functionality, allows you to have a centralized data center model within your organization. Going in an adaptable stage, since the 1970s when internet connectivity has been around, decentralized data centers have become more and more of a standard. So decentralized data centers adapt the functionality where it allows you to store or have a central location as a headquarters or a home office, and allow remote offices to work and function in that same aspect. Made it possible for businesses to purchase device. So the whole concept of decentralizing became more adaptable because of the enterprise grade of computing. It made it more possible for enterprise organizations to purchase devices fairly inexpensive and yet powerful enough for these systems, which allowed them to make requests like traditional mainframes through the internet pathways. It made it possible for fewer computer resources to spread across multiple machines. Hence, the decentralized model became more adaptable for organizations that are spread across the nation or across the world. In regards to decentralized model, and since the increase of internet and uptime of the internet reliability, it allowed remote offices to go even farther remote. We're allowing end users to remote into the office environment, in the computing in the office environment, to allow them to use the office productivity tools that are provided to them or content that's provided to them to provide a decentralized aspect in regards to connecting to a server frame for their enterprise computing. So decentralized model allowed businesses to create a head office fairly inexpensive to having remote users connecting into that, which increased the internet capability. So businesses in a decentralized model, if you look at it, allow you to use centralized functionalities through the internet pipeline. So that's primarily at a high level what separates a private cloud from a public cloud. There's more intricate pieces that goes on top of it, but generally when any organizations are addressing private cloud and public cloud functionalities, it's connectivity to the data that they're trying to reach and which pipelines it's going through. In a global perspective, the concept of decentralizing allows connectivity across multiple locations. In a virtualized environment, so data centers allow you to create virtualized functionalities, which generally mean in a virtualized environment, it's providing the hardware environment and providing the operating system in a kernel functionality. So allowing a organization in a virtualized service to spin up servers or compute power in regards to its resources to allow the end users to compute or connect to that compute power functionality fairly easily, and also providing multiple layers of choices. So allowing end users to choose what operating systems to deploy, and as well as what kind of configurations they want to allocate to a virtualized server. So this generally becomes a more of a data center conversation where when you're virtualizing a server, you can allocate these functionalities. Now this does not separate itself from a private cloud or a public cloud, but in regards to data center and decentralizing or centralizing the data center, these are the same kind of concept functionalities, where it allows you to control the kind of content that your systems or kind of devices that the content the system sits on. In regards to virtualizing, most organizations get the capacity to limit themselves in a centralized or decentralized functionality in regards to VM. Organizations become limited by the storage powers, by the networking functionality or connectivity, the processing power, and the speed that they're connected to. So allowing such, so that capacity, allowing of the physical restrictions that the system has. The amount of calculations that can be made, the speed that the system could respond and operate with. In the past decade has been a gray line on what is grade and grade solution for organizations. Shooting that's been out there since the 1990s. It made it easier and more their own data center. Hence the reason the data center functionality or data center solution for organizations became popularized. In regards to networking, the nature of compute and cloud computing is the one that makes the organizations leave a heavy virtualized solution and provide that compute power in regards to resources towards their end users. Cloud computing is based on where you where you place your resources and what the capabilities of those components are. There are three types of computing powers when you're looking at cloud computing. Technically, there's private cloud, which means that you're hosting your own environment in a centralized data center where it does not cross the internet bandwidth for an end user to be productive. You got the public cloud, which is a decentralized functionality where your environment is hosted in another solution or another data center where you have to cross the internet bandwidth to access the content. And a hybrid cloud, which technically means what it is. It's a mix of both private and public cloud functionalities. In regards to private clouds, generally, when you're looking at private cloud solutions, you have a server room or a mainframe in regards to what traditionally what used to be called. So what separates a server room from a private cloud is just a naming functionality. So traditionally, server rooms provide or allow the responsibility of the servers to the organization. So hence the organization is going to be responsible for managing these devices and making sure that these devices are up and running at all times. And also more control over the kind of configuration that these devices can hold. But it does not allow a lot of options because they're limited to the location of the facility, the storage amount the facility has, as well as what kind of services that these organizations want to have. As part of this solution, it does not cross the internet bandwidth for end users, as I expressed earlier, for end users to utilize these services. In regards to controlling a service environment, traditionally a cloud environment centralized move well, let's skip back a little bit. In a business, the business is in control of the entire solution. Why centralizing or moving to a cloud environment becomes cost effective is because it allows organizations to reduce the cost and provide a data center, and this is going back into the 90s, where organizations are moving away from having their data centers within their office location to using a facility that provides those data centers with them. This is still considered a private cloud argumentatively because the organization is still going to be responsible for the hardware that sits on those, for the hardware that's located in those data centers. Those data centers technically only control or provide you with the facility and the power and the cooling. So organizations in the 90s moved into this direction, allowing a centralized data solution for an organization that did not have to facilitate the office for them to store these kind of contents. So taking that content, it moved that solution into what we consider now a public cloud offering. So organizations took that private cloud model of decentralizing a private cloud model and moved it into a public cloud solution, which means that it now did not or limited the organizations that were using these platforms from having physical access to the hardware that allowed them to control that kind of configuration. So the benefits of using these solutions in regards to a public cloud services, it provides organizations with more on-demand service consumption, which means that if I need to spin up a VM to do a process that I needed to do, it's a lot easier for me to virtually connect to that VM environment and utilize the configurations that are provided to use the solution that I'm trying to put into place. There is not going to be technically any upfront investment. So as an organization moving into a public cloud solution, I don't have to purchase any hardware or any software that goes into this. There is no technical capital expenditure, which means that if I'm not using the solution, technically there's no solution for me to pay for. So it's done by compute power, where it provides a complete service and a complete solution for an organization to start deploying and utilizing these services. Now, why is this more beneficial? Because you're offsetting your actual hardware cost and offsetting your actual hardware devices and managing these devices and putting the responsibility onto the provider of the public cloud that you're going with. Businesses are still more or less responsible for the content, so it allows you to manage the content, but not necessarily the hardware that goes into the content. So defining hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud, as I stated earlier, it's a mix of a private cloud and a public cloud solution, which is more what we see today in regards to what enterprises are using. Technically, it's very difficult for organizations to be fully cloud-centric environment. That's because there's still some requirements of on-premise servers that are needed for most organizations for security purposes and for actively accessing data within a network infrastructure. Security purposes meaning that organizations are still deploying on-premise Active Directory to managing the devices that are connected within the infrastructure and providing access levels to, let's just say, file servers that may be sitting on an on-premise network where you're storing more or less your media files, where end users need to access large sets of data at a more efficient manner rather than pulling and pushing data through a data center. Understanding the concept of what cloud computing is and why it's been energized to move into a public cloud offering and what most organizations are looking at, it's all based around the actual end users and its development. So when you're looking at the adaptation of these cloud offerings, such as Azure, you're looking at the concept of why it's being so adapted. And it's all because of the developers and the app users using these solutions. So traditionally, if I was looking to deploy or configure an app on a data center, I would contact my IT for them to provide me with resource, such as a hardware, and as well as space allocated for me to use this solution. It's not going to necessarily be configurable to the model that I need, so it does not allow me a lot of options. I'm limited to the options that organizations providing me in regards to the configurations. And also, IT doesn't necessarily know the amount of resources I would need for the app, as well as I'm not really considering or really worried about using too much resources. That becomes the battle between the IT and the actual developer, is because the developer doesn't care about the resources. IT is limited to allocating these resources. So hence, hardware costs and services that goes on top of that becomes an exponential expense for organizations to look at when they're looking at utilizing these solutions in a more on-premise or centralized location of a data center. So in an app-centric environment that we are in today, has led organizations to look at public cloud offerings such as Azure to deploy these services, which makes it easier for organizations to allocate resources and services without having to have that upfront cost on hardware as well as licensing that goes on top of it. So in regards to public cloud, and when you're looking at public cloud, technically you're crossing over 3 different resources in a public cloud offering. As a public cloud service, you're looking at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service functionality. Now, as infrastructure as a service, when you're looking at a solution, it allows you to use VMs or virtual machines that are pre-configured. It lets you to spin up VMs really quickly, as well as changing the VM configuration in regards to adding resources or reducing the power of the servers to allocate better for the app that you're deploying or wanting to use. So this allows control over the developer or the organization that's deploying this to control the kind of server and compute power that's being used in this environment. Also, allowing control over the compute power if it's being used too much. So if there's a process that's taking too much of the compute server, then you can easily move solutions from one platform to another quite immediately by copying the image over and allowing a higher grade with more resources to be utilized to sufficiently suffice for the app's resources that it needs to be. So infrastructure as a service is a more common solution that allows organizations to start using these services and based on a consumption. So the more you use these services, the more allocated services that you're requesting, the more compute spend that you're going to be having. But it, as a concept, it still becomes a technical default because a lot of organizations tend to use compute power more than they actually need to because they're still on the mindset of a on-premise or private cloud configuration, which public cloud solutions provide a variety of benefits, allowing you to use lower end resources or idled resources when the organization is not using the app. So in offset hours, such as weekends or nights when organizations close, allows you to spin down these services to a lower grade services so that you don't have to necessarily spend the amount of compute powers in regards to the solution that you're looking to deploy. Now, traditionally, when you're going into an infrastructure as a service platform, you have the control over the hard drives, over the VM operating system, as well as the processing power that goes into the machines, the virtual machines. And when you're looking at this as a infrastructure as a service, this is what the requirements are to spin up, per se, a database when you're looking at a SQL database. As a platform as a service, it allows you to bypass all this service functionality and configuration and just go directly to the database. Now, the part of the platform as a service that you lose control over the network functionality as well as the server configuration. But you're gaining the control over the simplifying the deployment model. So allowing the data center that's managing your environment to provide you with the capabilities you may need to use these services and server functionality. So platform as a service allows organizations to start deploying solutions faster and start adapting to these configurations faster because it's more easier to deploy services as a platform as a server as an app developer or app configurer because it's no longer needing my input on the resources for the compute power. If the server is slowing down to a certain grade, it'll lower the reduced cost, but not necessarily impacting the cost as a consumer that using the platform. And same thing vice versa. So if the resources that I'm trying to use are more than the resources the platform can provide for me, the service automatically increases the capability with no impact to the cost of my solution. So in regards to comparison to infrastructure as a service, you gain control, but you end up spending a variety amount of solutions depending on what you're looking for in regards to the outcome of the server. And platform as a service provides you with a solution with a standardized cost. So that's ideally what separates the platform as a service and infrastructure as a service as a solution. Now, organizations, when they're looking to deploy these services, there's functionality into these aspects. So platform as a service allows you to utilize and speed up the app development and app functionality in your organization and get your end users accessing these content more efficiently and more reliable manner than traditionally expected. In regards to the services, I hope you guys got a better understanding what separates public cloud and as well as a private cloud functionality, as well as it got a little more insight what the difference is between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. I know we did not cover software as a service, and I'll do that as a high level. I forgot technically I missed that slide. But software as a service is a functionality that incorporates a license for an end user's capability. Software as a service, as a platform, it provides the organization a standardized solution not based on consumption. So it's a license that you serve to or assign to an end user that allows them to utilize this solution or services in the back end without having a consumption cost. So the services that separate infrastructure as a service and platform as a service versus software as a service, it's all based around consumption. That's the separation between software as a service and the other two infrastructures. Now, a couple of high points that I would like to designate on this webinar. We do have a envisioning session that allows us to get a better understanding of your environment as well as your organization's plan or tactics of utilizing cloud offerings such as Azure and Office 365. Now, in a workplace environment, we do have envisioning sessions that is designed for us to get a better understanding and provide you with a takeaway of the next solution or solutions that you should deploy within your environment to make your environment more efficient in regards to modern workplace. We also do have an Azure envisioning session that allows us to get a better understanding of your Azure environment as well as your compute powers that you guys are looking to implement, and provide you guys with a recommended migration method to get you guys to move from one platform to the other. So that's about it. I know this is going to be high level and fairly quick, so if there's any questions, please let me know.
All right. We do have a couple questions coming in, and we do have some time remaining for questions. Again, if you have questions that you have not yet shared, please go ahead and enter them in the question box now. And the first one I have for you, Orad, is how can you forecast your expense on Azure?
So it becomes really, it's a discussion point. There is on Azure a calculator that you can utilize to get an estimate of what your actual expenditure is. Now, in regards to infrastructure as a service or IaaS, it's really hard to actually calculate the exact expenditure because the exact expenditure is based on consumption of your organization's usage of the cloud. So as an IaaS service, the best tactic in this scenario would be utilizing Azure as a test and dev environment on the actual applications that you guys want to utilize to get a more rounded solution of what your Azure spend is going to be before you make it into a production side solution for your organization.
All right, thank you. And how difficult is it to upgrade the VM, the virtual machine on Azure?
So Azure makes solutions in regards to infrastructure as a service very simple. The whole concept of a public cloud solution hosted by another provider, not necessarily the organizations that's deploying it, allows the organizations that's utilizing it or as the customer to have a control panel over the types of VMs that they're choosing. So you can immediately increase the compute power in that VM by increasing the processing power as well as the hard drive or the memory that is required in that solution to control the kind of content and the concept that you want to deploy. So fairly easy is the short answer. It is done through a control panel that you can easily change the configuration of the server that you guys are deploying.
All right, thank you. And is there ways to lower the cost on Azure?
There are lots of ways of addressing this, and hence the envisioning session becomes more of a key topic point, especially for organizations that currently have Azure and utilizing public cloud solutions. Microsoft makes it somewhat easy for organizations, depending on the type of licensing that they have, to bring in their own licensing into the platform to reduce the actual spend that they have on a day-to-day basis. So bringing in your licensing reduce the cost of you renting, quote unquote, technically renting these licenses from the service provider, and allowing you to offset that cost because you made that capital expense up front to fulfill the cost of the solution that you're looking to put into production in the back end.
All right, thank you. And it appears that was our last question. Orad, the floor is yours for anything final.
Okay. As I stated, I highly suggest if you find these kinds of webinars valuable, especially with the Azure and the Office 365, to take advantage of the envisioning sessions that we have offering. It allows us to go more in depth in regards to the solution if you're looking at Azure, in regards to the capability that it provides, addressing any questions and concerns you guys might have, and as well as providing more or less a roadmap of your organization's technology into utilizing these services. So get in touch with your account executives. Let's set up an envisioning session to go over these solutions with you.
All right, so with that, many thanks to our speaker, Orad, and thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to check out www.pcm.com/webinars for our on-demand recordings and for our upcoming webinar schedule. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you again for future webinars. Have a great day.